Imagine if you discovered that everything you've built so far is built on quicksand. I'm not talking about small stumbles or occasional setbacks. I'm talking about that visceral feeling of watching your achievements crumble when the storm hits, of seeing relationships that seemed solid evaporate under the first real pressure, of feeling your brightest intentions disintegrate like sandcastles touched by the tide. There's a hidden reason for this, and it has less to do with your choices than with something no one taught you how to build. Prepare to discover the secret Miyamoto Musashi revealed at the beginning of the Book of Five Rings. Not brilliant sword techniques or advanced moves that wow crowds, but something far more powerful and permanent. He began with earth, with foundation, with the invisible that sustains all that is visible. This was no accident or formality. It was the recognition of a hidden truth that separates masters from dilettantes. Without a solid foundation, even the most ingenious moves are merely theater before their inevitable collapse. Lao Tzu knew this when he wrote that a tree that embraces grows not from a large seed, but from a deep root that no one sees growing in the dark. The question that haunted the samurai masters was simple and devastating. Why did warriors dedicate years to studying posture and breathing before touching a sword? Why did the world's most lethal fighters spend so much time in practices that seemed monotonous, repetitive, and devoid of any brilliance? This isn't another video about superficial productivity or temporary motivation that evaporates in 3 days. What you're about to discover is lost knowledge that has been fragmented, hidden in ancient texts, practiced by masters who understood that true strength doesn't come from muscles or strategies. It comes from an invisible foundation that most never build. Tokugawa Ieyasu waited 20 years, consolidating territory, while rivals shone and faded like shooting stars. Confucius taught that ritual creates structure that unleashes genuine creativity. Patanjali showed that repeated practice without attachment to the outcome builds an unshakable foundation. At this moment, you will receive the first key to the earth ring, the revelation of why everything you've tried so far has failed not for lack of effort, but for the absence of this hidden foundation. And when you understand this, you will never build your life the same way again. Welcome to Axiom Sage, where ancient Eastern wisdom meets modern life. This is Miyamoto Musashi's Earth Ring, the samurai secret of unshakable foundations. Have you ever tried meditation that promised lasting peace and felt relief for 3 days before your anxiety returned? Have you ever read self-help books that made perfect sense while you were reading them, but 2 weeks later you were in exactly the same place? Have you ever had powerful insights and moments of clarity that evaporated like fog when real life knocked on the door? This doesn't happen because you're weak or because the methods are false. It happens because you're trying to build a second floor before you have the first. Our culture glorifies speed as an unquestioned religion. It celebrates the instantaneous, venerating those who build mental and emotional skyscrapers in record time. But no one asks about the foundation. No one questions whether the ground can support the weight. Musashi warned in The Ring of the Earth that strategy without practical foundation is just fantasy dressed up as planning. You can have detailed maps, brilliant plans, crystal clear visions, but without a solid foundation to anchor them to, it's all just decoration floating in the void, waiting to collapse. The cruelest trap is not fragility itself, but the illusion of solidity that comes before it. You meet people who seem to have it all together, who display their achievements like polished trophies, who speak with authority about their successes, and then you see their sudden collapse under real pressure. How buildings that once seemed like cathedrals reveal themselves to be houses of cards at the first strong wind. How relationships that seemed deep prove shallow when tested by genuine hardship. How purposes that rang true vanish at the first obstacle that demands real sacrifice. Here's the truth no one wants to admit. You're not a failure because you can't sustain your achievements. You're trying to build skyscrapers on quicksand. The frustration you feel isn't evidence of incompetence, but a symptom of building on shaky ground that was never properly prepared. Bruce Lipton revealed through neuroscience that core beliefs about oneself, programmed before the age of 7, determine 95% of adult choices. This means that most of what you do operates on a foundation you didn't consciously choose to build. It's like discovering your house was built on soil someone else prepared, and now you carry the guilt for cracks in the walls that were inevitable from start. There's a moment in the history of feudal Japan, rarely recounted in Western books. Before Miyamoto Musashi became a legend, before he won 60 duels without defeat, he spent years studying with masters who frustrated him deeply. They didn't teach sword techniques. They taught breathing, posture, movements so simple they seemed an insult to the intelligence of a young, ambitious warrior. Musashi wanted to learn deadly blows, combat strategies, secrets that would make him invincible. Masters made him repeat the same posture 1,000 times. The revelation only came later, when he faced his first real duel, where death was a concrete possibility. While his conscious mind panicked, his body responded with precision that seemed to come from beyond thought. It wasn't a mystical talent. It was a foundation built through those seemingly useless repetitions. His masters knew something the young Musashi didn't understand. When the foundation is solid, technique emerges naturally. When the foundation is fragile, no advanced technique will save you. Tokugawa Ieyasu experienced this on a grander scale. He watched Oda Nobunaga conquer half of Japan with a boldness that seemed pure genius. He saw Toyotomi Hideyoshi complete the unification with strategies that enchanted historians. Both shone brightly and disappeared. Ieyasu, the patient one, the one who consolidated each territory before moving on, founded a dynasty that lasted centuries. Not because he was smarter or stronger, because he understood that building a second floor before finishing the first creates existential debt that eventually takes its full toll with compound interest. Confucius called this Li, ritual and propriety that create a structure capable of unleashing genuine creativity, not imprisoning it. Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras taught abhyasa, repeated practice combined with vairagya, detachment from the result. They all pointed to the same hidden truth. The patience to build the invisible foundation determines the height of what will be visible. This isn't new knowledge. It's ancient wisdom that modern society has made us forget in the name of speed, which produces only beautiful ruins. If you're feeling like this explains frustrations you've been carrying for years, leave a comment now. Building foundations. And if you haven't subscribed to Axiom Sage yet, hit that subscribe button and hit the bell, because what comes next will change how you build your life forever. Let me introduce you to someone. I'll call him Marcus, 32 years old, living in Seattle. 3 years ago, Marcus was the image of success to outsiders. He had a 6-figure tech career, an apartment in a desirable neighborhood, a seemingly stable relationship, and an exercise routine that kept his body in shape. But something inside him was falling apart in ways he couldn't quite put his finger on. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning anxious for no apparent reason. He'd achieve success at work, but feel no satisfaction. His relationships worked on the surface, but there was no real connection underneath. Marcus tried every solution modern culture offers. Therapy that helped temporarily, guided meditation apps that calmed him for 30 minutes, self-help books that made sense while he read them. Each solution brought brief relief followed by a return to a state of chronic emptiness. He began to believe the problem was within him, that there was something fundamentally broken in his mind or spirit. But the problem wasn't Marcus. It was that he was trying to fix symptoms without addressing the root cause. Then Marcus stumbled upon the teachings of the Earth Ring almost by accident. Not in a best-selling book or popular online course. In an ancient translated text he found in a small library while traveling. Something about Musashi's words struck him differently. They didn't promise a quick fix or instant transformation. They spoke of foundation, about starting from scratch, even when it feels like you're wasting time, about having the courage to appear slow, to build deeply. Marcus made a radical decision. He stopped trying to add more techniques, more strategies, more solutions. He began to dismantle the structure of his life, to examine its foundation. He discovered that his beliefs about success were inherited, not chosen. That his concept of relationships stemmed from unhealed wounds, not real insight. That his identity was built on soil he had never consciously prepared. And so he did something friends considered madness. He stopped expanding and started consolidating. Marcus implemented a framework that changed everything. Not overnight, not in a way that would impress outside observers, but in a way that created a foundation he'd never had before. First pillar, brutal self-awareness. He stopped telling comforting stories about why he did what he did. He began to observe real patterns in his choices when he was tired, stressed, and alone. He discovered that 90% of his decisions were automatic reactions, not conscious choices. It was like discovering he was a passenger in his own body, not the driver. Second pillar, values alignment. Marcus realized he claimed to value personal growth, but wasted time on passive entertainment. He said connection was a priority, but avoided deep conversations. He claimed to seek purpose, but chose comfort whenever there was tension between two people. This wasn't conscious hypocrisy. It was a misalignment between stated values and real actions. So he began making micro-adjustments, not dramatic changes, small, daily realignments that no one noticed but that slowly rebuilt kamae, true inner posture. Third pillar, cultivation of presence. Dogen taught in the Shobogenzo that external form reflects internal integrity. Marcus began paying attention to how his body held tension, how his breathing became shallow under stress, how his posture collapsed when he was in automatic mode. He instituted a simple practice. 3 times a day, he would stop everything for 2 minutes just to check where he was. Not to meditate or achieve a special state, just to be completely where he was. This seemingly trivial practice began to reveal how many hours he spent dissociated from the present, inhabiting an imaginary past or future. Fourth pillar, building consistency. Marcus chose a personal kata, a repeated form that would build a neurological foundation. He decided to do 15 minutes of mindful stretching every morning for 100 consecutive days. Not because stretching itself was magical, because consistent repetition of simple commitment would build muscle reliability he had never developed. The first 40 days were a battle. His mind offered 1,000 compelling reasons to jump. Each reason was a defense mechanism against building a real foundation. Fifth pillar, acceptance of temporality. Sansin, the spirit of the mountains in Korean mythology, represents strength that comes not from visible peaks, but from the geological foundation beneath. Marcus stopped measuring progress by external achievements and began measuring it by solidification of the base. This meant that some months seemed to lack progress to the outside world. But internally, something profound was taking hold. It was like watching cement dry. Nothing seems to be happening, but an irreversible chemical transformation is underway. Sixth pillar, practice of simplicity. In Hinduism, Ganesha removes internal obstacles before external construction. Marcus began subtracting instead of adding. He removed commitments that were social decorations without substance. He eliminated relationships that functioned only superficially. He cut out content that entertained but didn't nourish. Each subtraction created space for the foundation to settle without prematurely excessive weight. Seventh pillar, humility before the process. Marcus accepted that he was an eternal student, not a master. This freed him from the pressure of appearing to have the answers and allowed him to focus on building a real foundation. If you recognize your own story in Marcus's, comment now. I'm building deep. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because Marcus's transformation is just beginning, and what happened next will show why foundation changes everything. 6 months after starting, something unexpected happened to Marcus. It wasn't a dramatic burst of change. It was a subtle realization that his automatic responses were different. Situations that previously triggered immediate anxiety now found space before reaction. Conversations that would have been superficial naturally deepened. Decisions that would have been made on impulse awaited genuine clarity. He wasn't using special techniques every time. The foundation was working. In Bushido, there's the concept of kata, forms repeated until they become an unconscious reflex. Modern neuroscience calls this myelination. Every time Marcus consciously repeated his morning stretch, every time he checked his presence 3 times a day, every time he chose alignment over comfort, his brain was wrapping neural circuits in myelin. He was building neural highways where before there were only dirt tracks. This is why masters respond instantly, while beginners need to think. It's not mystical talent. It's a foundation built through 10,000 invisible repetitions. There's a real-life story in Japan of a craftsman who trained for 30 years, just sharpening blades before receiving permission to make his first sword. 30 years seemed to be merely preparatory work. But when he finally created his first blade, it was a masterpiece that cut effortlessly, lasted generations, and carried a quality that couldn't be explained by technique alone. The difference lay in the invisible foundation he built over 3 decades of practice that outside observers would consider a waste of his life. Marcus began to notice that people in his life responded differently to him, not because he was trying to impress them or using communication techniques, but because his kamae, his inner posture, had changed. When you speak from a place of solid foundation rather than camouflage anxiety, people sense it. When your actions reflect real values rather than a constructed image, there's coherence that others detect subconsciously. Marcus's relationship, which functioned only on the surface, naturally either deepened or ended. Both honest results of real foundation meeting superficiality. At work, Marcus stopped seeking promotions and recognition. He focused on building real competence in the fundamentals of his field. Paradoxically, this accelerated his career growth because he was operating from a place of growing mastery, not a need for external validation. It was a practical application of what Lao Tzu taught about Wu Wei. Effortless action that emerges from deep alignment. It doesn't mean the absence of work. It means work flowing from solid foundation rather than driven by anxiety and necessity. 18 months after beginning foundation reconstruction, Marcus faced a real test. A crisis at the company he worked for resulted in massive layoffs, including his own position. A relationship that had deepened entered a difficult phase, requiring painful conversations about the future. A close family member received a serious medical diagnosis. 3 simultaneous storms that, years earlier, would have completely destroyed Marcus. He expected collapse. He braced himself for the return of paralyzing anxiety, for the disintegration of the purpose he had found, for the revelation that all the foundation work had been an illusion. But something different happened. Marcus felt the impact of the crises. He wasn't an emotionless robot, but his inner structure didn't crumble. It was like the difference between a straw house and a hurricane and an oak tree in a storm. An oak tree bends, creaks, loses some branches, but deep roots hold the tree together. Marcus discovered that the foundation he'd spent 18 months building didn't make him immune to pain or hardship. It made him capable of making it through without disintegrating. Tokugawa Ieyasu taught that victory belongs not to those who conquer, but to those who consolidate conquered territory. Marcus had consolidated internal territory through months of invisible labor. Now, under real pressure, that territory maintained its integrity. He made decisions during a crisis that surprised even himself. Instead of desperately seeking the next position, he used the transition to reevaluate his career direction with a clarity he lacked while employed. Instead of avoiding difficult conversations and relationships, he entered them from a place of honesty that created deeper intimacy on the other side of the difficulty. Musashi wrote that strategy without practical foundation is fantasy disguised as planning. For years, Marcus had brilliant strategies that collapsed under the first pressure. Now he had a foundation that allowed any strategy to work because the foundation was solid. It wasn't that he had perfect answers for every situation. It was that he had an internal structure that allowed him to navigate uncertainty without crumbling. This is the difference between superficial knowledge and embodied wisdom. Knowledge tells you what to do. Wisdom is who you are when pressure reveals real foundation. Marcus realized something samurai knew. You don't build a foundation to avoid storms. You build a foundation so that when the inevitable storm hits, you have solid ground underfoot instead of quicksand. The difference isn't whether you suffer. It's whether you endure or crumble under suffering. And that difference is determined entirely by the invisible foundation you built when there was no crisis, during monotonous days of repetitive practice that no one saw or applauded. 3 years after starting, Marcus was living a life that seemed outwardly similar to his previous one, but was fundamentally different. He had a career in a related field, but one he had consciously chosen. His relationships had weathered the storm and emerged deeper. His daily practices were unexciting, but fundamental. To the outside observer, nothing seemed extraordinary. But Marcus knew he was living on a solid foundation for the first time in his adult life. And that changed everything, even when nothing seemed to have changed. Miyamoto Musashi revealed a paradoxical truth in Earth's ring. True speed is born from strategic slowness in base building. Marcus experienced this firsthand. Years ago, he was always accelerating, always adding, always expanding, and constantly crumbling. Now he moved deliberately, consolidating before expanding, building deep before building high, and progress was sustainable for the first time. A centuries-old oak began as a patient seed. Its strength lies in the roots that grew unseen for decades, not in the branches visible to all. When a storm comes, a tree with deep roots remains while fast-growing trees fall. Lao Tzu taught about Wu Wei applied to construction. When the foundation is solid, the structure rises without apparent effort. Not because there is no work, but because work flows naturally from a well-prepared foundation. Marcus no longer needed to force discipline. It emerged from the foundation. He didn't need to remind himself of his values. His actions reflected them automatically. He didn't need techniques to deal with anxiety. His nervous system operated from a place of internal coherence. This doesn't mean life was perfect or easy. It means he had solid ground under his feet, regardless of what was happening around him. Confucius taught that ritual and propriety, creates structure that unleashes genuine creativity, not imprisons it. Marcus discovered this. Foundational discipline didn't make you rigid. It made you free to improvise, to respond creatively, to dance without fear of falling. It's a paradox that masters understand, but beginners resist. They think freedom comes from the absence of structure. But real freedom comes from a structure so solid that you can move within it without fear of collapse. If you've made it this far, something inside you recognizes the truth in these words. It's not new knowledge you're learning. It's a reminder of wisdom you've always known, but modern society has made you forget. Your exhaustion of always rebuilding from scratch, your frustration with achievements that evaporate, your feeling of running on a treadmill without moving forward. All these are symptoms of building without a proper foundation. As samurai discovered through centuries of practice, you don't need more brilliant strategies. You don't need more new and exciting techniques. You don't need more knowledge of what to do. You need a foundation so solid that any strategy can work on it. You need to stop adding floors and start digging. You need to have the courage to appear slow to outside observers while building deep. Because real speed, the kind that lasts, the kind that supports the weight of complex life, is born from the initial patience of building an invisible foundation that no one applauds but everyone will eventually feel. Earth isn't glamorous, but everything that grows depends on it. Musashi started with Earth for a hidden reason that you now understand. Without it, everything else is just a sandcastle waiting for the tide. If this video reminded you of something you knew but had forgotten, leave a comment. Building foundations now. Subscribe to Axiom Sage and activate the bell so you don't miss the next revelation of Eastern wisdom applied to your modern life. And if this content is transforming how you view foundations, share it with someone who needs to stop building on quicksand. Until the next journey of ancient wisdom.